Welcome to our Digital Futures talk titled The End of the World with our guest Hernan Diaz Alonso, Director of SCI-Arc, and I would like to introduce him for a minute. Hernan Diaz Alonso is SCI-Arc Director and founder and principal of Los Angeles-based design practice HDAX, formerly SCI-Arc. He is an Argentinian architect, designer, and educator widely credited for spearheading the transition of SCI-Arc to digital technologies, playing a key role in shaping the school's graduate curriculum in the past decade. As SCI-Arc Director, he oversees the direction of an institution with more than 500 students and 80 faculty members, many of whom are well known in the fields of architecture and design. Along with his leadership at SCI-Arc, Diaz Alonso is principal of the Los Angeles-based firm HDAX, known for producing grotesque and sometimes unsettling work. It challenges responses to the environment. Additionally, Diaz Alonso has been named winner of the 2005 MoMA PS1 Young Architects Program, the AR+D Award for Emerging Architecture, and an honorable mention in the 2013 P&A Awards. And with no further ado, I would like to go in our conversation, The End of the World. Hello, Hernan, how are you doing today?
I'm good.
Good to see you. Good to see the sunny LA weather. So, as I was saying before, this is a topic that allows us to cover a variety of different grounds that range from, the current condition of the world, of course, that's why the talk is called this way, the ways how this might or might not impact the architecture discipline, to a variety of different ideas about the city, or let's say fictitious ideas about the end of the world. And maybe I'm going to start with a question that has been, it has been around for a couple of months now. The question whether a pandemic of this scale really means a change in architecture. So I'm thinking here about Rem Koolhaas's comments about the city and the dissolution of the city through the pandemic, that we're all going to live apart in the countryside, or ideas about the use of open office spaces and the end of it because of a pandemic like this. And I was curious to hear about your opinion or your ideas that are gravitating around that topic.
Well, hi, Matias. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Well, everybody's been asking these questions, this conversation about this thing. The answer is probably nobody knows exactly what is going to happen. As you were mentioned in the previous, before we start live streaming, it all depends how fast we get the vaccine. If we get the vaccine, how much it will change. I think it will change things. I mean, one could argue that every time that you have a massive change, and we haven't seen a global crisis of this magnitude since the Second World War. So I would assume that certain things will change. I don't know, like in America, at least after 9/11, it changed forever the way that we travel by airplane and airports. And we never scaled back those changes. So when changes happen, they're here to stay, right? So I imagine they will have some impact. How big it will be impact? I think it will make many of us evaluate, do I want to be living in the city? Like when the next pandemic hits me, do I rather do in the countryside or not? So I think there will be some of that. And I think there's hope for interesting positive change about that, and maybe make us reflect as a society all the things that we're doing wrong, and then maybe can for good consequences or for sustainability and global warming. At the same time, the cynical in me says, okay, the moment there is a vaccine or whatever, everything goes back and keep going as we go. So I don't know, it's hard to say right now what version we're gonna have. I really think certain things about what we're doing now, Zoom, and certain things, I think it will change quite a bit how we work and how we interact, because I think we all realize that we can do a lot of things without traveling or without being in person all the time. I think it may change the typology of our homes, because I think we're all gonna have to think, what is the Zoom space around me? What background? I mean, okay, we have a virtual background and so on, but I think it's also going to make us reflect a little bit about the house, because I think at least I never in my life, I spent almost 3 months and a half and counting, in which 95% or 98% of my time is inside the house. So it's made me rethink a lot about design and start to think, oh, I should do more remodelations in this place. We should have designed something else. So I don't know. I think that it may have big impact. It may have a small impact. Again, I think human beings, we are very impatient and selfish. So in a way, we think that this is pandemic is like the first thing ever. Like the world has gone through a lot of pandemics and crises like this, and the world changed, but it didn't change as much as we thought, or it didn't change exactly in the way that we thought. So I don't know. I think, yeah, it's going to change a little bit. It all depends, as you said, what will happen with the vaccine or not. I mean, if that thing takes much longer and so on, they may be much more radical changes that architecture need to address. But we have to wait and see.
I mean, the one thing that certainly is changing currently, I mean, one thing that is really apparent is that about 100 years ago, the world went through a similar pandemic, which was the Spanish flu, 1918, 1919. And I recently read that the main recommendations during that pandemic flu were actually wear a mask and social distancing. It's kind of sad to think that in 100 years, we didn't make more progress in terms of really understanding how we can fight a pandemic of that scale, and which actually reflects on our own understanding of science and how fast science can make real progress. So yes, real progress was made in these 100 years, but in certain areas that we did not expect, obviously. So it was surprising for us, this pandemic, although there were lots of canaries in the coal mine that were saying this is going to happen at some point.
Yeah.
But let me go to maybe another aspect of something you mentioned just briefly on the past here, which I think is really interesting, which is the sort of the Zoom environment and how that's affecting people, and how something like Zoom fatigue, for example, is real. Yeah. But also, and especially in your role, the main really dramatic change in methods of education that were forced by this pandemic. Yeah. And I'm curious to hear how you and SCI-Arc responded to that challenge at the beginning and till now.
Well, it have multiple layers. Because when we went into the quarantine, we were already finished the 9th week of the semester, of a semester of 14 weeks or so. So we were past the mid-semester deadline. So it was kind of a scramble, and I thought that the majority of the students and the majority of faculty did quite well. Now we are in the summer thesis, and I think we have a little bit more time to adjust and prepare to do it this way. And I think, like everybody else, for the fall, we are anticipating some kind of a hybrid model, which you have certain components in person, certain components online. I think, like everything else, it has good things and bad things. Of course, the human interaction and the collegiality and all that among the students and faculty can never be replaced. That's a fact. On the other hand, particularly the professors of history theory and liberal arts, they were very happy with the format, because with the chat and so on, it created an interesting format of conversation. I think the reviews were interesting too, just because I also allow you to have character from over the world. But also there is a democratization about everybody being the same screen, that they change of format and instead to the reviewer in front of it. So I think there has been certain good silver lining. I think it forced all ourselves to operate much more as a community. So I think the logic of authority is being reviewed. And I think Zoom forced you to do that. So to me, that has been an interesting experience, how we engage with the students and with the faculty. And it was a different version. As I said, it became more communal and town hall, digital meetings and so on. So there are certain things that I find positive. The other things I find completely alienating. I don't know. I'm always a little bit pragmatist about these things. It's like it is the scenario that we are, and the question is how we navigate the best that we can. And I always insist that architecture also require a huge huge amount of optimism. So this is another problem as it is. So I think you had to find a way to be optimistic about it, but at the same time, when you don't have another choice, or when there are no options, you try to figure out how to navigate. So it is a different format. It's producing a different form of distribution of content. You have to adapt to that. But as I said, I think it has a lot of negative things, and I think it has some positive things. But it's an interesting issue. Like I wonder. I mean, we were talking about the pandemic, about 100 years that we didn't learn, and what we see going on with the protests in America and Black Lives Matter and so on.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if we were not in quarantine and we were not interconnected with Zoom, if the people would have the same positive and supportive reaction, and we all confronted and start to think about what should we do in as a society. I mean, talking about society, they cannot learn and keep doing the same thing. So there is a lot of things I will say about the democratization of technology that I think is pretty much evident. At the same time, I think there is a high level of alienation that is happening. But I don't know. I really think many of these platforms, they're here to stay. As I said, I think when we learn these things and we incorporate these things, we are here to learn. I think it also has a lot of dangerous things coming with, particularly in the capitalist system that we live on it. I think it's making review everybody how we can work and how we need to work, and a lot of people start to think they can work in different ways. So I just think we are just scratching the surface, and what does it mean? I don't know. In terms of the intellectual conversation, I think it has a lot of positive things. Like we're doing this now. You and I were talking. I don't know if you're in Ann Arbor or somewhere else right now, but we are talking with an audience in China and so on in a way that probably last year we wouldn't be doing this, because I wouldn't be part of this conversation, because it will be in Shanghai in person, and then you will be forced to make certain decisions because budgets and so on. So it's bringing a lot of other things, which I think is great. I think in terms of content, in terms of I think that works. I think in terms of the human dimension the architecture requires is way more problematic, and we have to wait and see what does it mean. But again, we don't have a choice right now, so it's difficult to speculate about when you don't have options.
But if we stay in the moment and don't speculate on what's going to happen within the next year or half year or so, which is anyways, as you say, almost impossible, yeah, it gives us a lot of interesting moments. Like you touched on something which I thought was really interesting, which is this moment democratization of content and ideas and discussions, which is really valuable. I also discussed this with others, that these final reviews that we all saw now in the last couple of months from different universities was an incredible push forward in democratizing this sort of content, because normally a review is a very closed circle of people sitting around in a room and discussing that only with students and a couple of people who are lucky enough to be there, but that's it in most cases. Right now, in the last couple of months, we were able to do exactly what you're mentioning, assemble international juries for reviews and opening it up globally through streaming. And so you're actually starting to share the content that you're generating with your students in a completely different way than we were doing that before, really democratizing that content. And that has to also, by the way, I think that what you said also, that why do those several things confluence, like the Black Lives Matters movement, the protest movement, and the whole Zoom, establishing Zoom and other platforms, is because those things become far more visible. It's really the realization of the little brother instead of the big brother. Like people can film everything, and right away it's content online, and you can accuse people of that immediately. Of course, there's misuse too, but in the majority of cases, I think there will be a really interesting idea of how to control the people that control us.
Well, it's super complicated, because in one way you have the democratization, but at the end of the day, the people who own the platforms are very few companies. So I do not think it's clear yet who is controlling what and what is becoming what. but it's clear that the pandemic, I mean, I don't know. I mean, when the title of this conversation, the end of the world, you can see it in the way, like, I don't know, somebody showed me in Instagram the song that was going, which I think is important. I think it's the end of the world, comma, as we know it. So I think that what the song says, which I don't think is a great song, but I like what it says. So it's a little bit about that. I think a pandemic like that it marked the end of the world as we know it, and there will be new versions of it. And I think certain things will be better and certain things will be worse, probably. It's just it's not clear yet what it will be presenting. So, for example, in relation with the protests, I'm very hopeful in what it can signify for the American society. I think this may be a moment in inflection that change will happen. So we want to hope for that. But again, these platforms of distribution, it's hard to say yet. It's hard to say because, as I said, it gives us a sense of democratization. It gives us a sense of automatic distribution of information. At the same time, it doesn't build enough time for reflection. It doesn't build enough time for fact checking. So there is a lot of things that also come that are a little bit complicated, and we had to figure it out and readapt. And probably, I think it's for the younger people to figure it out. I mean, I'm 51 already, so you can only do so much catching up in the way how things evolve. I mean, I don't know if that happened to you. I think you're younger than me, but I find that there are certain things that it's difficult. I mean, I still come from a generation that I used to read the news in the newspaper, and the news requires an X amount of time to be processed and digested and analyzed. And right now is the news go through Instagram or Twitter or something like that, which is great in certain aspect because it makes evident things and it makes injustice and many things automatically think, but at the same time, it equals a lot of things and equals good and bad and noise. So it's interesting to see how that thing is going to evolve. And I think it's not different with Zoom and conversations and education and so on. So there is a certain fundamental humanism that will remain present. I mean, at the end of the day, you're in Zoom and you're listening to somebody who has something interesting to offer or not. And the platform cannot change that. The platform is just a vehicle to facilitate or get on the way of that. So I don't know. I think there is certain things that are changing a lot, and there are other things that remain fundamentals. Like as I said, like we see with the protests. Yeah. It's a beautiful thing to see. The question is, can that be transformed into action? Is a society willing to change? Is the policies and the things that need to happen willing to do, or this is just a moment of distribution of the information and then no action is taken because of that? So I don't know. I mean, and I think that you can move that about architecture the same. Like, I mean, everybody's talking about how much architecture is going to change after the pandemic. So, well, the first question is how much good architecture we will get to do in the world. You know, what do we mean by architecture? What are we talking about architecture? What architects are we talking about? How are we gonna? I'm pretty sure it's gonna reshape the way that we work. I think if already the idea of the office or the single boutique architecture firm was already in crisis, the Zoom, I think, is going to completely change that. I think we're going to see new models of practice emerging out of that. I think we're going to see new forms of architecture, not talking about formalism aesthetic, I'm talking about new forms of architecture, about what architecture is. It's buildings, or it will be more than that. So I think that's going to be interesting to see. But I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of technological revolution in the last 30 years. And when you look back, the changes were important, but they were not as deep as we thought that they were. So I don't know. I have a very healthy, skeptical optimism, if there is such a contradiction.
I mean, the thing with the architecture practice, which I think is really interesting, what you pointed out, like this idea of the boutique architect that has a group of people he's working with to create fantastic architecture, which has been the model envisioned for the last almost 50 years. I mean, basically, Hans Holland's office was like that. Yeah, he had like 10 people he was working with doing these great things. That's it.
Yeah.
But it was already in crisis for the last 30 years because architects are now in other fields. They do art, they do fashion, they do graphic, they do video, and so on. Some become directors. The one thing that architects are really good in, and it doesn't need to have practice, is we're really good in synthesizing different contents into one unit, from different areas.
Yeah.
So that actually describes what, in my opinion, what architects do. It has nothing to do with making buildings. And it has.
It's correct. We are experts. We are experts in being generalists, which is a very weird commodity.
Yeah.
These days. Yeah, I think that could be interesting, but I think it's also going to change how we operate. I really think that finally these things that we've been talking for 25 years about open systems, a model of collaborations in which you really don't need to have a formal office. You just can be a couple of people, 2 or 3 people thinking about things, and then you collaborate with some other people for this project or that project. I think we're going to see more and more about that. And to me, that's exciting. That's really exciting. But I think also, that's going to have massive implications in education. I think we're going to need to start changing the way that we teach and we discuss these things. I mean, to me, one of the most interesting things that is happening with the Black Lives Matter protest is finally makes all the schools, including ours, to confront a kind of a single model of operate. And I think this is going to break it down to the ground, and we're going to have to rebuild a new one. And it's going to incorporate a lot of new different point of view culturally, but also it's going to completely new formal point of view about models of practice and what architecture means. So I don't know, there is something really exciting about that moment of reckoning. And I think the fact that they coincide with this pandemic, which forces us to be working in this way, I also think it will facilitate that, because by default, we are forced to do that. I mean, like, I don't know, like in Tauman or another of the great schools or in Tonji, but for example, we are going to be confronted with the fall and the spring. The problem is going to be big time remote online. Like, for example, team teaching is going to be almost impossible. So you're going to have to open a lot of more individual and latitude in each of the faculty to do other things. So this already is going to change a lot the conventional structure about how we teach. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, as a faculty, you're working with your group of students in your little Zoom bubble, and you are much more isolated here in the school. So the students are not walking around each other, or the faculty are not walking next to each other. The self-contamination that happens naturally by human contact, it will be replaced by something else. So it's going to have it's going to become much more like an archipelago model, a lot of islands. So it's going to be interesting. I mean, I think there is a lot of exciting things. I understand. And also it's going to be incredibly frustrating in many other levels, because you have to, I mean, I don't know for you, but everything in Zoom seems to be taking the double of time that you will take in person. So I think the Zoom fatigue is not so much because you're in the screen, it's because you have to spend the double of time that you will be doing it in another format.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And also, by the way, I think that what we're seeing now with Zoom is just an intermediate solution that was just luckily enough there when this whole thing took off, that everyone had to do communication like that. But you can bet that there's a bunch of other companies trying to develop tools that allow us to do more things. Because one thing that you mentioned, which I think is really problematic, is when the studios become insular, like their own entities somewhere, without any cross-pollination with others. Because I think especially, when students see other work is when they get challenged and inspired, right? They can say, I can do better than that, or actually that's an interesting project, how do I respond to it? These sort of serendipitous meetings that happen in different studios, which are currently not possible, I wish there would be something that allows us to do this really like chance encounter of different content that inspires us as architects.
Yeah.
Which is not happening. You completely rightly described what we're doing as a Zoom bubble, which it is. I mean, right now it's the two of us discussing this with probably a bunch of people watching. Yeah, it's more like TV than really like a real communication between a variety of different minds. Although I have to admit, I really enjoyed the larger panels that we have had already with 8 to 9 people discussing. It was great. It really worked nicely.
Well, again, we have no other choice right now. So you navigate what you have. I don't know. I mean, it depends also of your individual characteristics. I'm very homey. I like to be at home as much as I can. So for me, it's manageable. I mean, it doesn't drive me as crazy as it drives other people crazy. I don't know for how long I can do it, but for the time being, to me, being grounded, not able to travel and many things, I'm fairly happy about it.
Actually, I have to admit that I felt really bad telling people that I don't feel that uncomfortable with the situation, because it allows me to focus on doing things. Which you thought, you're right. I mean, when you're traveling all the time, that focus is only half time there.
But also, again, I think is you have to have our generosity spirit to understand also. I think it's an age thing and so on. At certain stages in your life, you're much more comfortable about being at home and so on. I think when you're younger, this had to be really tough. I mean, this is a horrible time. You have to be isolated. You cannot interact with your friends. You cannot interact with your loved ones. There is certain stages in your life that we all require human contact, human touch. And right now, if you have it before, I mean, if you are with somebody and so on, probably it's very different. You have to navigate this alone. So I cannot imagine the toll that is for many people. This is a horrible situation for a lot of people.
You're touching on something which, sorry to interrupt you, but there's something which is really profound in the conversation, which is how much the trauma of this is actually changing social behavior on a long term, because that's definitely going to change architectural content and program and so on. Yeah, if the behavior changes of humans.
I wonder how much the panic, like after the Second World War, and then remember when, for example, with the Cold War, there was a lot of people building bunkers because fear of nuclear war and so on like that. So I wonder, a global pandemic like this, how much of the panic and fear will resonate in years to come. That will force us to think differently. Like I don't know you, but for sure, with our family, we're gonna be thinking as soon as we can navigate that, we're gonna be thinking, okay, what changes we need to do in our life, the way that you live, but also the architecture you live in for the next pandemic, because I think we're all going to be thinking that there will be a next pandemic, which is something that at least in my whole adult life, I never thought about it. I never thought about what will be life with a pandemic after a pandemic. It's kind of very selfish how human beings we think about it. And now this happens, and it will go. It's going to take at least another year to start to see some clarity, in terms of vaccine and so on. So we know now. But after, let's say, there come a vaccine, and we kind of build the herd immunity, and this became a manageable virus like influenza or some others, and we coexist. But the residual that is going to be in all our psyches, individually and collectively, is going to be massive. So it's going to be interesting what architecture does to that. The same way, again, some of the younger people, younger students, they don't remember after 9/11. But for a while, it was a completely different psychology about people traveling, going to airports, getting into a plane, going to security. You could see the fear and panic in people's faces. So it's going to be interesting to see how we navigate that. And it's going to be, it could be painful. And maybe what you were saying about Kojas talking about going to the countryside, it's going to be interesting to see how many people are going to say, you know what? I don't want to live anymore in my apartment in middle of Manhattan, or in London, or in LA, or in Shanghai, or in Beijing, or in Ciudad del Cabo in South Africa, because if the next pandemic comes, I want to be in open field, in countryside. So I don't know. There may be some truth to that. So it's going to be interesting to see. It's going to change the cities. Are we going to get rid of more cars because we're going to need to have more space for people to walk? This is going to change how we think about public spaces, because public spaces are going to be more required for social distancing for the next one. Every typology is going to become in crisis. I don't know. We have to see. Or there is a vaccine, and everybody 3 months later forgot that there was a pandemic, and we go like every time we do with everything else. You have a flood, and suddenly everybody worry about global warming, and then the flood goes away. We rebuild a little bit the city, and we move on, and we forgot until the next natural catastrophe. So I don't know. I want to be optimistic, but the cynicism in me is still very deep.
Well, I mean, you know me. I'm an optimist in all these extensions, especially also about technology. But I have to say that the coming together of this whole variety of different aspects at the same time. It's not only the pandemic. You mentioned it. It's global warming. It's more storms, more weather conditions that are bad for for everything. You have, and of course, at the same time, which is good, the rise of a resistance to injustice in the society. Like there's so many things that come at once. Then the rise of automation, which is also something that is currently happening. At the same time, all the things are coming together at once. I was wondering already why the whole discussion about AI, for example, exploded exactly at the moment where this pandemic hit.
Yeah.
So there must be somehow a connection, or it's purely coincidental, which I don't think actually. Like it is at the end of the day not only things that are happening to us, it's actually things that are also challenging politics and challenging the economy profoundly. I mean, for example, in Germany, they're already starting to abolish facial recognition because it is an intrusion into your private sphere. It's something that in other countries is probably completely unthinkable. They're just gonna use it as a tool for profit. So there's like a lot of things that are coming together at one point, which I think is also fitting to our conversation about the end of the world, that there's like all this storm of elements coming together that are going to change our society profoundly. And with that, of course, also the course of architecture.
Yeah. No, I don't know. I don't have much to add to that.
So let me tell you one thing. Let me go back for a second again to your finals for another thing that I saw, which was really fun, which was basically that you guys were using Twitch as a tool to show your finals and your final exhibition.
That was the end of the show. I don't think there was much Twitch used in final reviews.
Okay, then let's say just only for the exhibition. But the idea basically that you're using a platform that primarily is used to transmit gaming content, transforming that as a tool to represent architecture. I think it's kind of interesting because again, it goes into what we were discussing before in the ways of architecture, the business of architecture is changing. Like I can imagine that architects would be really good in creating content for games. And there is some people who have been doing this already, like I'm thinking here, Jose Sanchez and others, that actually shows again what you were talking about, the changing model of the role of the architect in our society.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, again, I think this is look, architecture is always a cultural catalyst, so you kind of react to whatever is going on. So I think this is a territory in a domain that I think architects are going to get more and more involved. I don't see myself too much into that role. I don't see myself that interested in that. But at the same time, I don't think it's any different than any other kind of change that we see in technology in society at any given time in which architecture reacts. So it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, you start to see also with some ideas of e-commerce and something like that, they're becoming more and more like video games and so on. So in the other hand, this conversation has been going on for a couple of decades already, right? And it doesn't seem to fully crystallize as part of our profession and what we do. I mean, it always seems to be operating on the edges. So I don't know. I mean, again, I think it's also a matter of comfort with the platform and the medium and the aesthetics of it. I find that it was super exciting to see it in SCI-Arc and what John Cooper was doing with that. It's not necessarily an area that I personally that invested or interested in, but I think also those mediums, you see it to evolve super fast. So I like to see how that's going to keep evolving and interacting and so on. I don't know. I mean, again, it's one of the things that it has a lot of qualities in terms of what it does, in terms of interactivity and interaction between people and so on. On the other hand, it produces another forms of alienations, but I don't know, maybe in the world that we live and the way that we were going with social media and video game and so on, maybe this is the kind of the pandemic that makes sense in relation to that world that we were living. And I think that also will make us reflect in relation to that. I think before we were forced to be quarantined at home, there was a more and more embrace of in the human interaction mediated to platforms, right? And right now we have nothing but a choice. Even those of us who were not so into mediation of interaction, either by media, video games, or whatever, we are forced to do it this way. I wonder also if that's something we're going to revisit as a society after the pandemic is over, is how much we want to keep embracing the mediation of interaction, or we're going to want to go back to some kind of a more pure form of human interaction. So it's going to be interesting to see if after this pandemic, we will escalate in the acceleration of that technology mediation, or we will be kind of a reset moment in which we'll start to think, okay, now that we don't need to be isolated anymore, do we really want to go back and isolate ourselves by choice? I don't know. Again, yeah. I'm probably pretty much everything that we talk about and navigate into pure ambiguities.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on something which I think is profoundly important, which is the moment of reflection, especially within, if we stay now within our discipline and we stay within architecture, I bet with you that your education in architecture was probably pretty similar to mine, in that we were trained very specifically in Western ideals of architectural production, in Western architecture history, and in that very specific field of understanding architecture. And now through what you're experiencing also with Zoom, this globally opening up, and of course through the discussion with social justice movements, that are actually really questioning whether we should have only that sort of Western canon of architectural education in our field, or if we have to start to expand that conversation to understand that there's other cultures with other, other contributions to our discipline, and how this gets implemented. Yeah,
how it gets implemented is gonna be the difficult part, and it's gonna be the hard work. I think the first part of what you're saying, I think pretty much everyone commit to that, because I think we all see the beauty of that possibility, the idea that the multicultural influence of it in architecture, and I think beyond also architecture and so on. So I really think that change is here to stay. How we're gonna do it, how we're gonna implement it, remain to be seen. But I think at the same time, I don't think it should be that difficult neither. I mean, I think it's just a matter to open your mind and open your heart to those possibilities and start to look at that thing, and then to operate into the things and how to incorporate that, and also to give the opportunity to have the people who have that expertise, to have that knowledge, to share it. I mean, this is one of the tragic things, is like whatever happened with globalization the last 20 years, we tend to focus in the pragmatics of globalization, and we didn't focus in the benefits of the cultural conditions of globalization. The idea that we can interact and work and navigate multiple cultures, multiple backgrounds, multiple ways to see the world, to see architecture, and so on. So this moment of reckoning, maybe is the time that starts to change, in which this possibility of ultra interconnectivity allows us to really start to pay attention to more and more diverse points of view on this. So that part, I'm fairly optimistic. That one, I feel really optimistic that I think that will produce a change that is required and needed. And I think, again, and I think it will challenge also what we understand as architecture, and where do we put the value, and where we put the authority of the value of it. And I think that you can start to understand that can have multiple authorities. We can have multiple ways to understand that, and also there could be a certain democratization of those things too as well. And I think that can open the field of creativity in a way that other field has been doing it for longer than us. And you can find in other creative fields that very natural flow about mixing, interacting, combining. That architecture will have a kind of much more rigid a structure that we always feel less comfortable about opening it up. So that one I feel really happy about it. I feel very confident about it.
I'm curious.
That we will do it.
Curious to see how that progresses forward. I mean, the one thing, and I don't know how you see it, but I have the feeling that ever since I started to be interested in architecture, I have the feeling the discipline was always in crisis. No matter which time it was, there was never like a moment where you really had, this is a moment of clarity, and this is a moment where we know that we have to move on in this or that way. And part of that crisis was always this sort of schizophrenia between trying to maintain a disciplinary position within architecture and at the same time being influenced by exterior forces and disciplines, right? Because I think I completely subscribe to the idea that architecture needs an identity and needs a disciplinary position to have, otherwise it becomes irrelevant. Yeah. So when you were describing, for example, before, the way how new practices can emerge within this crisis that we're seeing, that basically cater to a variety of different fields. And I also mentioned that there's architects who are fashion designers, filmmakers, etc. Is this still architecture, or is it already something different? You get my point somehow, I think?
Yeah, but okay. It shouldn't, right? I don't know. Again, I don't know. It depends what architect you ask. I'm probably in that sense, I'm probably not the right person to ask, because yes, I'm an architect. Yes, I teach and I'm the director of School of Architecture, but always my interest has been way more broader than architecture. I've never been one of those disciplinarians. I never been confined by that. So I don't know. I think that one, I think you will get as many answers as architects you ask. I don't know. I always look with a healthy doses of admiration, a certain fluidity that other creative fields have that in architecture is difficult to attain. And I understand why. Architecture takes longer, moves slower, requires more money. But I always crave that appetite that architecture became more like some of the other fields that you were talking about, that they can navigate with more celerity and so on. I understand, again, why it doesn't happen in architecture that often. But it would be cool that architecture is more like the other discipline that you're talking about. But at least I think in the schools we can do that. I don't know if the profession will take, I think the profession requires, and the profession is a whole different beast altogether than. But I think if we do more and more of that in the schools, and if we do more and more about how we navigate that, I think eventually it will start to percolate in the profession. But again, I'm not the right person to talk about that, because my professional life is really non-existent. I mean, like my office is a very marginal office who does only small things here and there. So I've never been an active participant of what is called the profession.
Well, I don't think that's what I meant.
No, I know it's not what you meant. I'm just saying I don't know. I don't have the answer for that.
That's totally
you have
fine.
to ask somebody else.
But I would like to go back maybe to one thing that you described before. And you were talking, for example, about the moment when you come from a generation that still read a newspaper, which was real paper and real ink, yeah. And the difference to something like Instagram, right? Where and the main difference being that a newspaper has this set of curators basically that are filtering information and actually really making sure that the information is right, that they're printing in. So there's like a really specific set of ethical rules, or a set of rules of ethical behavior for a newspaper, for a good newspaper. Let's assume that one first. that is going to provide a specific information to the reader that's going to enhance their knowledge about a specific topic, whether it's political, economical, or cultural, right?
Yeah.
Versus Instagram, where there is no filter whatsoever except hashtags, yeah, and very very little filtering about what value that information has. And I think that's the huge difference between what I'm trying to describe here as the architectural office as an abstract model, not as a real material creating, but as an abstract model. That there's a curation going on of content that you as an architect can take charge of and digest or present in a specific way to the public realm. And ideal in this sort of very abstract description of the model, it doesn't matter whether you're doing jewelry or buildings, yeah, or writing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's maybe more the idea that architects have a specific ethical position that they're trying to represent with their content.
Yeah, no, yes, I would agree with that. I would agree with that.
So what else was there on the outline I sent you? I think we were talking about, briefly before we started, we were talking about movies and the ways. Yeah. I would be actually curious to hear from you, like, what was the latest movie you saw and how that actually influenced, what impressed you? Would be curious.
I think like everybody else, I've been in quarantine, so I stream a lot of stuff. So I don't know you, but I'm finding it hard to keep track of what I saw because I've been watching more stuff on TV than in movie theater. For me, I tend to remember movies better when I went to see it in a movie theater than when I watch it on TV. So I've been rewatching a lot of things that I like and things I've been. But if I had to point to anything recent that there was something that I found interesting, I don't know. Hard to say. I can tell you, I'm really looking forward to see Tenet, the new Christopher Nolan movie, but I don't know when that will come out, or they will have to go directly to streaming on TV. Well, I don't know. I mean, I haven't seen. Again, I've been watching so much stuff that I cannot remember anything anymore. It's all blur. I don't know. I mean, what else? I've been watching a lot of things with my kids, so I've been watching a lot of kids stuff.
Maybe I can start. I actually, here's an interesting experience I had. I tried to watch again Lost. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And I figured out that once you know what's happening, it's completely boring to watch it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was an interesting experience to rewatch something that was completely riveting the first time around when you watched it, but it's impossible to rewatch because the mystery is completely gone. So this moment of mystery that was so important in the first run, completely gone. Yeah. Versus other series, another one I rewatched was, which I really like, Battlestar Galactica, the one from the early 2000s.
Yeah, I never watched that one ever. So
that was really good. So I can really recommend that one because it's the one science fiction series that combines a really good story that is very human with a really interesting environment. Yeah, and the environment looks believable. So it's not like, you know, completely off the rail science fiction, jumping the shark thing. But
yeah, you know, like everybody else, the thing I enjoyed the most was which it was fascinating to me because I remember I was not that young. I mean I was already grown up, but I knew who Michael Jordan was, but I didn't follow sports at the time. So to watch the ESPN documentary, The Last Dance of Michael Jordan, Chicago Bulls, it was fascinating to watch. I mean, there is something interesting these days, which I'm very interested in, is the cross-platform medium feeling about things. Mm-hmm. You're really watching a documentary about sport figures and a sport team, but it's built as a work of fiction. So I find that very interesting these days, is the cross-narrative and the cross-format. So there is something really interesting going on. I mean, it's not only that. I don't know you, but I've been watching until Netflix. 3 or 4 years ago, I never watched documentaries in my life. I never find documentaries interesting. I always found them boring. And suddenly I'm fascinated by documentaries, and I wonder how much the cross-platform has changed in the mediums. The same way that you watch some films that are almost shot like they are documentaries, and vice versa. So I'm probably more interested right now in those kind of methodological things that the content itself of the movie that I'm watching. I see myself drifting more into see how they did that. I mean, how they use old footage mixed with new footage, okay, I mean, this is a story that I know. I know how many championships he won. I know how famous this and important this player is. But then they still find a way to build tension and to hook you up. Like it's a story that you don't know. So there is something really interesting about that. So I don't know. I also caught myself watching, for example, something like The West Wing out of rejection of Trump. So you want to look at something that looks like a normal human being running the country, right? So I don't know. I think there are more and more of us building those parallel realities. So I realize now while talking with you that my approach to what I watch is already has been much more methodology oriented than content itself. So I can be watching a bad movie and I'm not really focused if the movie is good or bad. I'm focused on how they did that and so on. And maybe have to do with the augmentation of the amount of time of the thing that we are streaming these days, since we cannot go out at night or whatever. So it's becoming like the default thing that you do, right?
But I think that's kind of
I've been watching a lot of Argentinian and Latin American films, which is something I never did much in my life. And now suddenly I feel a need to do that. So I've been chasing in Netflix and Hulu and Amazon movie from Argentina or Mexico, Brazil or Colombia. I have an appetite to re-engage with that. So I don't know. It's kind of interesting moment in that sense.
I was thinking that I think this is a longer strain in your way of selecting or talking about movies. I remember very well we had this discussion a long time ago about Blade and the way how that really bad, 3D effect was done.
I love the first Blade. I love it. I still love it.
Yeah. But you were also still talking not so much about the story, but about the cheesy effect of the figure flying apart and the blood in between and so on, which was kind of fun.
Yeah, like I'm very curious how the new Matrix is gonna look and how it's gonna be.
Yeah,
like I'm curious about those things more than anything else.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that definitely is part of the way. I mean, I remember that there was always sort of the way how you were looking into movies.
Yeah.
In terms of documentaries, I don't know if you know this one, but if you don't, you definitely should check it out. Jodorowsky's Dune.
Sorry, can you repeat that one?
Jodorowsky's Dune. Like there is this filmmaker called.
Yeah. I hear about it, but I haven't looked much into it yet.
Yeah, definitely. I think you'd like it. It's an amazing story. I'm not gonna spoil anything, but it's.
I want to say. I mean, I never liked the first Dune anyway. I've never been a big fan of Dune. I don't know why. I never got into it.
But just to circle back to the to the topic of the end of the world, and if you're talking about movies, it's really. I mean, you certainly also observed that a lot of the dystopian movies of the last decade or so were dealing or longer even dealing with scenarios that are kind of similar to what we're experiencing now, a pandemic that really affects everything and changes everything.
Yeah, I wonder if this pandemic will. I don't know. For a while, I've been talking about. I'm kind of tired of the dystopian as the only motive for science fiction. So I wonder if this pandemic, because now we're living the reality of some of the things, it will change how we. I mean, maybe we start to see more happy, optimistic science fiction movies. It will be interesting. I think it's super difficult because I think the dystopian is so enraged in the zeitgeist and how we see things. But I don't know. It could be an interesting thing. I don't know. To me, aside all the beautiful thing about Afrofuturism and all those things that Black Panther had, the other thing that was super interesting about Black Panther was, which I consider, okay, it's a superhero movie, but okay, we can stretch it into science fiction. But it was fairly optimistic in terms of it. So maybe there are some hints here and there in how this is going to navigate. I don't know, after we spend a year and a half dealing with this, when it's going to take the process, I don't know how many people are going to want to watch and rewatch things that remind you of this. But in the other hand, I don't know how many movies has been at the Second World War. So I don't know, there will be a motive of this will become that. But I really think it's a good time for science fiction to rethink the generic state of mind when the science fiction movie get triggered. So I really think one will hope, let's put it that way, that being going through this process will change the genre, and they will start to see flourishing new ideas in relation to the genre. Again, I don't know how many more dystopian science fiction movies we can see. I mean, they're kind of boring. They're all kind of the same. Some of them will be more refined in their aesthetics and more refined in their digital or CGI or whatever. But it's basically the same story again and again and again. So one will hope that this can start to talk about different things, and maybe global warming and sustainability, some people can start taking a positive thing that, okay, suddenly society learn and change. And I wonder how much popular culture, and I know there's a lot of discussion about that and a lot of people writing about that, but I wonder how much popular culture ingrains in us, the certain things becomes unavoidable because popular culture tells us that it is. You know what I mean? Like, maybe we get so comfortable dystopian that we cannot see anything but dystopian futures.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
I wonder if that will start to change. You will see it differently. So if you look at it, yeah. So I don't know. I hope that it changed that at least.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree.
Dictionary work is start to infuse it with different things.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's also that I actually literally started doing studios with students where I was insisting on utopias instead of dystopias. Yeah, because that's actually far more. It's also far more difficult to do a utopia than a dystopia, to be frank with you, a positive one. But the interesting thing is that, for example, during the Depression in the 30s, yeah, the major shift that happened in Hollywood was really to escapist movies, fun, yeah, because people wanted to get entertained in a positive way. They couldn't see any more crisis and drama, yeah.
Yeah.
And the other one, which is really, I'm curious about to see what's going to happen we're going to see this in the aftermath of what we're seeing right now. So it's difficult to evaluate right at the moment. But funny enough, Dave Grohl, I think, a couple of years ago, he said that the one thing about crisis is that it makes the best music. Yeah. So, and I'm curious whether,
Yeah, could be.
So I'm curious to see if the crisis really is going to inspire interesting things in architecture and art and design. So we will see where that, but this is something we're gonna see in retrospect. It's probably something we don't see at the moment because it's too close to us.
Yeah, it's way too early to say.
Yeah.
We're in the middle of it.
Well, Hernan, I think we're about to at the end of our hour. So I have to thank you very much for providing your time. It was a great conversation. Really always fun to talk to you. Always great. I hope to see you soon in person if it's possible.
Yeah. Eventually we'll get there.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me. This was fun. Yes, a pleasure talking to you and whoever was watching.
And greetings to Florencia and the kids and everyone at SCI-Arc.
I will. Same to you, to your family.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.